canvassing shift. I have been knocking doors practically every weekend and then some since December for this campaign. And we're really still reeling from what we were able to accomplish and hoping that these types of wins can continue, as well as we build DSA into a fighting political party for socialism in the United States.
And Jack, what do you got to say about how have you been fighting the good fight for Zoran on the ground? I know you're driving right now, so
Yeah, and just tell me to shut up if you can't hear me. But welcome.
We can
everyone.
hear you. We can hear you.
That's great. That's great. Hey, Donald, Joseph, Sid, all the viewers, happy to be here. Sid said it's an exciting time. I've been doing a lot of work as like a city worker. We managed to get our union to endorse Zoran #2. Got, hundreds and hundreds of city workers to, show up to canvass, reach out to our leadership to support the endorsement. We had some of our leaders speaking at the rallies and things like that. So it's definitely a kind of a watershed moment for DSA, really breaking into the mainstream of the union movement. And I'm excited to talk more about, what kind of potential will come from here. It's, some exciting challenges. We've just kind of supported our new boss, who we'll be negotiating against, which is a interesting contradiction, but I'm looking forward to figuring it out and happy to be here with everybody today.
Right, and I think you just highlighted the ultimate issue at hand here, which is that we're basically fighting for the mayorship of the world financial capital, global capitalism, and this is not an easy job that we're trying to fight for here. And, there's a lot of worry about the possibility that even fighting for an executive office is just a complete blind alley, that this is just going to be a disaster for the socialist movement. A lot of people see Zoran as a complete sellout. There's been a lot of different ultra-left takes on the issue. I think there's been a lot of hope. There's been people, kind of seeing him as a new potential voice in the Democratic Party. I'm seeing a lot of people who are kind of looking at him as a potential avenue for realignment. So there's a lot of different ways I think this can go, but I think maybe a good place to start is maybe let's maybe look at the beginning of this campaign and how we reacted initially to the idea of Zoran running for mayor. I think because I think all of us are members of Marxist Unity Group, and we all have opinions on electoral strategy, on the correct ways to do electoral strategy. I think we have this idea, correct, of running for office is about tribunes for the people. It's not so much about managing the capitalist state to more efficiently deliver reforms, even though we do fight for reforms and we don't dismiss reforms, but it's really more about agitation and education and the act of creating a socialist, creating an identity around the socialist program, I think. And so there's this idea that, running for stuff like presidencies and mayorships, if you do so, you should only do it kind of as an agitational run. And there's a risk that if you actually win the position, you're in a position of managing capitalism. So I guess what was kind of some of the, because I'm not in the New York City mug, so but you guys all are. So maybe kind of fill the audience in on some of the debates that you guys were having, I guess, around the Zoran campaign, what people were saying about this campaign and how we should relate to it at the beginning of it all.
If I can start, all the way back in August, as the rumblings of this campaign began to be heard in New York, I think that was really one of the big concerns, right? That we were still living under the Biden administration and the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And we were really, I think, responding to a very, very politically cynical era in that we knew that at the beginning of this campaign it would be an incredible uphill battle, in the sense that a lot of people did not think about the executive power question at the beginning, because the opening to actually bring some of these more economistic policies to the forefront, that opening was a lot bigger. The various committees, the bodies that began to debate this, were not necessarily certain about winning. In a lot of cases, the idea of agitation was brought forward as a reason to run this campaign to skeptical supporters that thought, well, what's the point of doing this if he can't win? Which is what was really considered the orthodoxy at the beginning of this campaign. And I think, as a response to that, I wrote an article for the New York City Marxist Unity Cell about whether to run Zoran, which basically focused on the idea that if we run, we have to be bold in some of our agitational demands. Otherwise, people get demobilized, and this won't build the base of support necessary. And I'd love to talk about how I think that panned out later. But the idea of the executive power and executive governance, I think, has shown up very, very little in discourse about this campaign. I think to our detriment, of course, because of the way the primary system operates. We were able to run this campaign. We were able to win, and now that we are in this position, we have presumably another 7 months before the campaign takes office. And hopefully we can use those 7 months to really answer some of these questions in a critical way.
So, there was a bit of cynicism then, is what you're saying about those.
Yeah, and the cynicism from a Marxist unity standpoint, the cynicism felt good. It felt good to be able to tell people, look, there is a goal of electoral politics that actually goes beyond winning, right? There is a goal of agitation. There is a goal of pushing the needle. New York City DSA is defined by its electoral machine that has scored a number of electoral wins and a few legislative wins as well. So the idea of beginning to transform this machine into something that is both capable of legislating and capable of agitating was very good at the beginning. And we could kind of begin to see how the ideas of New York City DSA began to change as the goal became victory in the election rather than agitation.
So you were on the side of endorsing Zoran, right, then?
I offered a lot of cynicism and skepticism, but I decided that I'd go along with the endorsement or lack of endorsement, no matter what happened. I think in one of the votes I voted yes, and another one of the votes I voted no, based on the conversations and some of the deliberations we were able to have.
What about you, Joseph? What was your take on all this?
I think I was initially somewhat cynical about it, for a lot of the same reasons I think that Sid was saying. But I think I became I warmed up to it when I realized he could actually make waves. I was still cynical about him winning though, and I even wrote an article about it, where I detailed all the difficulties that he would have to face, mainly the NYPD. And instances of capital flight, which, as far as I can tell, is a debate that still hasn't been picked up in DSA.
Right. I mean, there is
people are starting to talk about it.
I have seen some.
In what ways do you think? I haven't really been privy.
I mean, in my circles, in the city workers spaces, people are already starting to think, have a conversation about, what it means now that, he's our boss basically. And, the idea that we didn't elect him just to, be the person who's going to, wave a wand and make things happen. he's the best position he has.
Yeah. I think I heard something like he's the best. He's because you cut off a bit, but he's like in the best position or something. I'm not quite sure what happened there at the end.
Yeah, he's the most likely to win us a good contract.
Right. What I'd be interested in hearing, like, what some of your, like, not people on the left, but what some of your coworkers have been saying, because I've heard a lot of interesting things from my coworkers who are not like like particularly politically active.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of those questions are coming up for sure in my conversations with them.
You're breaking up, Jack. Yeah, no, his connection's breaking. But what are your coworkers saying, Joseph?
I've had some interesting conversations. There was one coworker who described it as the morass of socialism. I work with a lot of, for context, I work with a lot of lawyers, PMC people. So there was a lot of sort of, I think, a lot of concern. Some of my coworkers, they really harped on the experience thing, like, oh, you know, he's not experienced, he hasn't been in government for that long. I think that's a big one. I think everyone's sort of leery of the administrative, like, is he going to be able to govern, basically? Is he going to be able to govern effectively? And is the city going to, everyone seems to think the city's going to plunge into chaos somehow.
Yeah, that narrative is really annoying because there's this idea that well, there's this meme that basically, like, it's going to become like, what did someone said it's going to become like Gotham City. It's going to, the crime rate is just going to explode and it's going to be terrorism everywhere or whatever. Like, there's just like insane, like, nonsense about, like, Zoran being like a jihadi or whatever. But no, that's obviously fake. But
I mean, Sid should interject, but it's been from the New York Post and the right wing tabloid. It's been a consistent theme of their attack on Zoran, is that somehow it's going to lead to a deterioration in, I guess, social order, and people are actually believing it. In large parts, I think older homeowners specifically, where that's going.
Right.
Yeah. I think to piggyback off of the New York Post thing, I think that's something that we really need to be like scared about in a really critical way. Because one of the things that we often experience in New York is that, especially within the electoral apparatus, there is a lot of timidity in the chapter around being careful not to say things because the New York Post might pick them up or some other sources. And I think that often defines a lot of what people say and do out of this idea of what the Post is going to say. But I think at the same time, we don't want to have the pendulum swing too far in the other direction and forget that maybe the New York Post will not care about individual comments about Globalize the Intifada. They won't care about that in a way that it can sway public opinion. The way the New York Post sways public opinion is by taking the side of capital and slowly wearing down and chiseling away support of the movement over, say, a 4-year term in office. And I think that's like one of the things that I've been really talking about, especially with a lot of the new canvassers, a lot of the people who are just getting into really political organizing for the first time, is trying to remind people, look, we have to form ourselves into a political party that is capable of defending Zoran from right-wing attacks, is capable of using our democratic and deliberative processes to hold him accountable when he does something politically that we don't like, and also to make a structure to continue these victories both at the ballot box and as tenant organizers and as union leaders and as people who are advocates for transit, people who are advocates for housing, to really to like cohere ourselves into a functional political body that is able to accomplish these things while continuing to allow us to recognize who the enemy is.
Right.
And I think the idea of doing that isn't always as strong in New York as I think it will be in the future.
So, actually, I'm just going to bring up what the New York Post is saying right now, just out of curiosity, because
put it out there. Give us the garbage.
Because it's always garbage, and I just wonder how many people really take this shit seriously. Like, is it just boomers?
I'm sure it is a lot of boomers.
I couldn't really tell you exactly how the New York Post functions as like a rag here. I can tell you exactly how the New York Times works. I can tell you exactly how the Wall Street Journal works. I can tell you exactly how local papers back in my home in Minnesota, how they manufacture consent. I don't really know what the New York Post constituency is and how it moves the needle on things. But what I will say, it is like I think very representative of what the local petty bourgeois here in New York are thinking when they're at their most craven and repugnant. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing full white genocide here. Right?
Yeah, they're trying to say he's going to like do a tax on white people because he said he wants to like tax the richer, whiter neighborhoods more than the poorer, browner neighborhoods, which is, yeah, like everybody knows that like the whiter neighborhoods are richer. Like, come on, like it. Come on.
Are those the words he used? Whiter neighborhoods?
I think so. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, that's what it was. They got really like really freaking out about this. Yeah. This was like, yeah, from today. So they're going on about that. They're gonna say that this is like a big like attack on white people.
Yeah, and this is going to.
They're going after his wife.
Yep. This is going to keep happening, and I think one of the things that we as a party need to be doing is to not be like consistently freaking out about every single article, but rather recognize the different push forces on the future mayor to not do the things that we want him to do, especially around issues very near and dear to the New York Post. For example, around the police. Like, what are we as an organization going to do to ensure that Mamdani is able to carry out the abolition of the special resource group, which brutalizes protesters, especially pro-Palestinian protesters, that he has vowed to disband? How are we going to make sure he follows up on cutting the money off from the NYPD's communications department? How are we going to make sure he follows up on cracking down on overtime? How are we going to make sure the Cop City plan is no more? And of course, perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure as an organization that the things that he is doing are not things to back away from and that actually are putting us on the path to abolition? We need to be, as an organization, we need the tools and we need the space to vocalize that going forward if we want any of these things to work out.
Yeah, here's the crime thing. Electing Zoran and New York City would spur cop
yeah, exactly. A cop exodus. And it's like, on one hand, don't threaten me with a good time. But on the other hand, yeah, this is it. The role of the police and the support for the police are going to be a core aspect of governance here, and we need to be ready for that. We need to adopt a consistent and forceful abolitionist position that is able to support these goals being carried out.
Yeah, I think looking at like the Dinkins administration or the de Blasio administration with the way that, I mean, particularly Dinkins, with the way that the NYPD sort of organized itself as a major interest group against the administration.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, they do have resources, they do have a sort of rank and file power in the police unions that can, and not just that, but you know, engage in essentially internal sabotage. You know, accelerate the process of social disorder and dislocation.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think what might happen is the NYPD might just stop enforcing the law and stop, like, doing their job and purposely make crime worse.
Yeah.
You know? And so they can report crime has skyrocketed under Zoran Mamdani's anti-cop administration. Even though Zoran has he's been quite honestly pro-cop. Like, let's be real. He has run as a pro-cop socialist. Like, he has not.
I think he's definitely drifted. Was the right word on it.
And that's one of the things that's been really frustrating, right? Is that, like, in terms of his political, his actual beliefs, they really haven't changed since the beginning, but he has certainly backed off of some of the rhetoric around policing. That, like, when this was framed at the beginning, he would often have the special resources group defunding the comms department as something that was paired with creating a department of community safety. Again, all of these are good proposals, but the thing that I think we need to be able to do is ultimately recognize that our goals and the goals of the NYPD are entirely in opposition to each other.
Right.
And that a single politician, especially after winning an election, can really only fudge so much. We saw the NYPD kidnap Bill de Blasio's daughter. We saw all of these things happen in the past. And the actual act of governance means that you can't really run from these contradictions forever. And I have been very open about criticizing Zoran as a candidate when it felt like some of these stances against the police, when it felt like he was backing off of those. But
I guess what you could do is DSA could take over his community of public safety and turn it into a left-wing paramilitary, and then we could
well, yeah, I mean that's.
But then we could defund the NYPD and then just replace it, and then
and replace it with NYC DSA.
Yeah,
I think
the
we
Red
gotta.
Rabbits.
Yeah,
Got a few
gotta
more
replace
steps.
it with the Red Rabbits. I think we. I think we got to work on some folks in NYC DSA a little bit first.
Yeah, that's the thing is I don't
there.
really know if I want those people to become the cops either. So yeah, I'm gonna have to work on that plan. But I do think there is well, Nami actually had a clip of him talking about the police issue, which I think is like I think it's normal for him to moderate his stance on this when running for mayor. I think it's not really possible for him to abolish the police or replace the police or do some kind of radical anti-police measure given the state of the party. We definitely need to talk about Palestine as well, but I think, given the situation that he's in, I think he could be a little bit more anti-cop. But,
I mean, I think the size of the victory, indicated that maybe a little more aggression could be warranted.
Well, we got time for that.
Yeah.
When he becomes the mayor, that's definitely going to be the rhetoric, regardless of whether we say it or not.
Hold on, I found it.
Which is why I'm always like, don't let the post dictate the terms. Don't let the post, shut us up. That's a big, line in the chapter right now. We got to be careful what we say about, DSA's involvement in XYZ, labor movement, DSA's, position on XYZ things, but they're going to say it anyways. People are going to know anyways. And if we moderate too much, then we just end up with de Blasio. People didn't really end up liking de Blasio towards the end. Stand for what we believe in. You know, and I think Zoran will do that.
I want to say it very clearly, because both Mr. Tilson and Andrew Cuomo's Republican billionaire donors have been lying about me on our television screens and right now. I will not defund the police. I will work with the police because I believe the police have a critical role to play in creating public service, public safety. And fundamentally, when I put together our proposal for the Department of Community Safety, it was built upon the many conversations I had with rank and file officers who had told me that they signed up to join the department to take on serious crimes. And yet what they were being asked to do is play the roles of mental health professionals and social workers. And that is part of the reason why 65% of crimes in the first quarter of this year are still not solved. We need to ensure police can focus on those crimes, and we have mental health professionals and social workers to address and tackle and resolve the mental health crisis and homelessness.
So, you know, that there, it's like, yeah, and is in NYPD like 50% of New York's budget?
No, it's actually 5%.
Okay, no, I don't know where I got that meme from.
It's
Okay.
the defunding the police is always a political problem rather than an economic one. I can't actually do that much with the money that I take away from the cops. I can do a lot of good things, but not very much. It's about defunding them as a mode of restricting their political power.
Right.
Sorry.
And, you know, an interesting opportunity for this is, like, you know, literally, I think, you know, the month that Zoran is sworn in, he'll have to negotiate the Policeman Benevolence Association contract. So it'll be literally one of the first things that he's going to have to do in office.
Yeah. Yeah, that clip though, it's like I'm not sure what the audience is. I think the point of that statement, right, is to say Cuomo is a liar above all else. Like that's why he did that. But I think what this moment kind of shows is that he suddenly was thrust into this position of immense political power as he's moving through this election that he ends up winning by a pretty wide margin. That's an opportunity, even if he doesn't want to say defund, to begin to press on some of the questions about police and policing. Like, he could say something like, the police have not been successful in preventing crime. We need to think he can do a classical social democrat, take a classical social democrat turn and say, we need to look at the social causes. There are a wide range of options. There are a wide range of options other than defund that I was hoping that I would get a chance to hear because of the amount of resources put into this campaign. Right. It's the exact same thing we saw on the Palestine stuff, right? At the beginning of the campaign, Zoran Mamdani was saying things like Israel has a right to exist. And after receiving pushback from a wide range of sources, he stopped saying it. He stopped putting forward that talking point. Of course, his opinions on the issue never changed. I've supported him wholeheartedly. It's that people wanted him to stop saying this, and he actually found something else to say on the question of Israel's existence. And I think the general election is actually going to offer us an opportunity to do something very similar on police, where we have a candidate who back in 2020 was saying we must defund the police. He said it many, many times. I think we're going to be in a point in 2025, as his victory was so resounding, where he can actually push alternatives to policing in the public sphere, in public discourse, just as he has successfully done with issues around Israel.
I think my worry, though, is that he's going to be so fixated on like proving that New York City isn't going to like fall into chaos, because he's going to be running against like Eric Adams, right? That he is going to like, I feel like his main goal is going to kind of like be proving that like his like policies are going to like improve public safety, which is, and I think that's going to mean like him emphasizing like, I'm going to work with the NYPD. And I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I just have a feeling that I don't I'm skeptical that he's going to like go more anti-NYPD in the general election. I think he's going to try and emphasize that, you know, he's going to say, I have real solutions for public safety that are not just like, I think he's going to try and like offer some interesting ideas and try to, I think he might actually have some pretty good policies too, but
Yeah.
I'm skeptical that
haven't
he's
changed.
actually going to like take on the political power of the NYPD, because
I mean, that's a
it's
hard
just-
struggle.
yeah, I know that's the thing. It's like, what army can back him up? It just seems like such a difficult task.
Well, we do have to consider the balance of forces. You know, if you want to run a defund agenda, it's simply not there. You sort of have to build a movement that can normalize certain aspects of these, broadly speaking, abolitionist kind of politics. I mean, that's up to, you know, DSA and, you know, the other rank and file elements in the city to do that. I think it's possible to push it, but that's got to start getting built today.
Right. And I think there's also just like, it wasn't really clear what exactly the policy details of defund the police actually are. Like, does it mean we're like, you know, moving part of the police budget towards other social services? Or does it mean we're totally, you know, just totally wiping out the police? You know, so I think, you know, there is that ambiguity there that I think, you know, maybe Zoran felt like he had to totally dip off, but I don't know. It's a difficult problem.
Yeah. And again, it feels really intractable, right? We are in 2025. We are 5 years on from the murder of George Floyd, right, in Minneapolis. And it feels like a lot of people across the left, especially in DSA, have really retreated from thinking about the role police play in the maintenance of racial capitalism in American cities. It felt like there was a real theoretical advancement happening in 2020 and 2021 that we have entirely backed off from. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in my lifetime, except around this issue and this moment. And I think it really is going to be up to DSA to take a very strong, very clear position on this, and continue to maintain the role of abolition in discourse, right? In 2020, so many groups sprung up, became relevant, focusing on Black liberation and the abolition of the police. And most of those groups did not end up surviving. They don't exist anymore. What does exist is DSA still, and we need to show our support for Black communities, especially being brutalized by the cops, and show ourselves as the real abolitionist force, and be able to come up with a political message that might go beyond what a single politician is able to offer in a moment.
Right. I guess I think part of the problem is I think the abolitionists didn't really come up with political solutions. Maybe
Well, they didn't party build.
Right, but I don't think that they had. I think there was not an actual plan as to what you do with the police. Like, in my opinion, the solution, and this is obviously actual abolition of the police as a long-term goal, is something that I don't think you can really achieve until you get to communism. So, you know, my stance was always that the idea should be to replace, you know, beat cops and regular street police with a conscripted people's militia. And the response I always got was like, isn't that just cops, but by like a different name, right?
And isn't the idea to divorce the social order functions of the police from its institutional political existence.
Right, and the argument I gave
It's
is like,
fine, whatever you want to call it is my point. It doesn't really.
right, and
People
so I
always make
think
that argument when it doesn't really. It's not germane.
right, so I feel like that would be the real solution, right? But if Zoran argued for that solution, like he still would that would still be too radical, right?
Yeah.
Like if he actually said, "Yeah, I'm going to shut down the NYPD and we're going to create like a people's militia," that's going to be like formed like through conscription, and because this there's and it's going to be
Even
democratically controlled through community management, and he actually like put forward a real plan. Like I would still be like attacked as like
well, even what he wants to do about like shifting the the mental health services away from them, that's gonna engender a huge fight. That's gonna
right.
be a big pitched battle. For them.
Right, that too.
Yeah.
Even then, that would engender a huge fight. So, like doing anything around policing, I think is a huge political battle that I think we need to start like actually approaching with some serious political realism.
But I mean,
We also
Department of Community Safety, I think, just given the number of like rank and file social workers that are organized, it does seem like it could get us, closer to this militia concept than it might appear. I think the big question with a lot of these like elements of Zoran's demands are around like a lot of them are economistic, right? Like invest money in this or that kind of thing, and the question really becomes political. How do you do this as mayor of a city where the mayor has a lot of control, but there are also a lot of things that they don't control, and there are a lot of things that the people don't control as well. So how to actually have the political will to implement these things is like a whole other can of worms.
right. So we got a question. Do you think as mayor he could order closure of overseas precincts of NYPD? It'd be cool if he did, but and again, like it would be like waging war on the NYPD, I think.
Yeah.
It's like what happens when he does that? They go on strike, they start sabotaging him. They stop enforcing laws, they start making life harder in the city.
I mean, all sorts of dirty tricks that they can resort to.
Yeah, there's just this is why the mayor is just the worst job you can have as a socialist.
It's the worst. It's awful.
And it's like, this it's just so frustrating to hear him say, "Oh, I'm working closely with the NYPD." It's like I get it. You can't just like press the abolish the police button and magically fix this problem as mayor, but this is a real fucking problem. The police.
It's a huge problem, and I think one of the things that we're going to be up against too is the idea, which is completely true, that we're going to have to pick our battles on this front, and it's up to us as the party to make a determination about what those battles are going to be. I don't want the mayor to pick the battles for us and we tail him. We need to say, this is how we are going to push for our abolitionist principles. In the short term, we would like you to target this. And we not the other way around.
Yeah. No, I think the community of public safety is an interesting idea. And we'll see what happens of that because when you see a lot of this like panic around crime in New York City that I see, a lot of it does kind of like center around like mental health crisis stuff. And like I don't really think pigs are the people that should be handling a lot of that stuff. So we'll see what happens with this. I think there is, I think Zoran is trying to navigate a very difficult position. I think there was also him I think there was one thing that concerned me, which was like him talking about working with the NYPD to go after like hate crimes, which is like, I could see that going in like a bad direction, but it's like, you don't want to also be like,
you don't want to be like seen
don't want
as
to be
soft on hate
defending
crimes.
So it's, I don't know.
I mean, it can't be worse than our current mayor who adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. And I thought that the article that Jacobin put out, which was like, they put out some article that was like, Zoran Mamdani is right about public safety. It's just, I don't know. I thought it was pretty silly because it's just, taking a completely uncritical stance to the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Zoran campaign is kind of a Rorschach test for, what are your politics? And I think I heard someone say, like, if none of your priors are invalidated by this campaign, then you're not really thinking about this, right? But, yeah, I think Guastella does not have any of his priors invalidated by this campaign.
Yeah. All right. So, like someone just says, a whole new generation of Americans are about to realize why reformism doesn't work. Well,
could I say something about this?
yeah, go for it, Jack.
The future is not written. The future is not written. The past is written. There are a lot of bad examples of executive power, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And if we want things to be better, we need to figure out a plan to make it happen. I understand why people feel, afraid, and there are lots of things to be afraid of, but we have an opportunity to make history in the way that we want it to be made in. And I think the Zoran campaign is somewhat receptive, to DSA as a party kind of pushing for that kind of stuff. So we don't get to make the conditions that we live in, and the future is not written. And I think we need to put our heads together and figure out a plan to navigate this as much as possible. Maybe we will realize reformism doesn't work, but I do think we need to find some ways to experiment with how we can build our organization, build consciousness when in these kinds of conditions.
Well, ultimately it creates opportunities, right? It creates opportunities to organize. If you sort of foreclose the future by saying XYZ doesn't work, then you're caught flat-footed when, like I think Sid was saying, your priors are, invalidated. I think a lot of people, a lot of sort of anti-electoral Marxists, I guess, should really come to terms with, what this process has been since 2016, because your priors are being invalidated with no real strong alternative to take its place.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, we know that like reform, we know that you can't like reform capitalism into communism. Like we know that reformism doesn't work in like that sense. Like you do need like a political break with the political order. But in the sense that reformist political campaigns, can they make gains for the working class movement that can further the organization of a socialist movement towards a revolutionary? I think that is possible.
I mean, for me, it's not only possible, but I think this is where I really have reassessed my priors. And that, like, I was always a believer in the electoral project as a tool for party building. I'm an orthodox Marxist. I believe in tribunes of the people. I believe in doing this. Previously, I think I held a lot of space for people, including Marxists, who did not. I don't think I do anymore. I think what this campaign has really shown us is that if you actually care about party building, the electoral realm is going to be one of the best ways to do it. Like,
I have no patience for anti-electoralism.
I used to have patience for anti-electoralism because a lot of those people are perfectly good organizers and they do other things. But if you are dismissive of the electoral project as a tool for party building, I don't think you can be helped right now, frankly. I think what this campaign has shown us is that if you want to pull people into political activity on the level of what I call like the middle layer of being an organizer, this is kind of how to do it. A bunch of these people, I can guarantee you, are going to be very difficult to turn out for some other internal DSA work we're going to do over the next year. But I can promise you, in Bed-Stuy, when we're going to run another state legislative campaign next year, we are going to have a much larger base, not just for like doing the actual legwork, but also, slowly bringing people into the party apparatus and like getting people to be a real participant in things. And hopefully we'll be able to have more discussion, more deliberation around around these things. But it's clear that this is where the people are going to come from. Other base building efforts like tenant organizing, rank and file unionism, very clearly important. Those things legitimize the electoral effort. But it's clear that like if you are going to get people off the street into some of these things, especially people who do not have experience in tenant union or labor unions, this is probably how you're going to push them in that direction.
Yeah.
I don't really see another way of doing this except for people who are already skilled and trained organizers.
Yes. Listen, as Lenin says, politics only happens in the millions. And it's just, I don't think the left is going to be able to organize millions of people through organizing one tenant union at a time. As implied, and I'm not trying to denigrate that work because it is incredibly important work, but the reality is it does not scale up in the way that electoralism does.
Yeah.
And it's just, the reality of the situation is like, you know, people in our country, even if they don't vote, they still see bourgeois elections as the legitimate sovereign and the legitimate means of determining the sovereign. And if you don't engage in that process, and if you don't hack that process and intervene in it, you're not going to be able to have political relevancy in contesting the sovereign.
And so you need the tenant unions. We've seen this campaign. We saw this last campaign. They're just two fundamentally different modes of organizing that we have to merge with each other.
Yeah.
And we have to be very, very skeptical of all of the people who want to prevent that from happening.
Are there people who want to prevent that from happening?
Unfortunately, I've seen people denigrate tenant unionism. I've seen people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen people denigrate some of the rank and file stuff that does regular old community building that actually gives legitimacy to these electoral efforts. Unfortunately, it's a more common opinion than I'd like to think. But it's why last year in Bed-Stuy, when we had our candidate run for office, he got very heavily involved in the tenant unionism struggle because he saw that as the cutting edge of radicalism that is actually going to give him a base that he can trust to actually carry out the electoral project. Sometimes you just catch the wave and the electoral project sort of works independently, but not every chapter is going to be in that situation. We have to temper people's expectations on that. You actually do need to do the deep organizing to make this happen.
Well, and part of the challenge is like a campaign happens on a short time frame and base building happens on a long time frame. And I think when you make asks either way, people are looking at their organizing projects, you know, in different time scales, and the base builders will say, you know, you're just turning me out to canvas, you know, how does this help my project? And I think vice versa. But, you know, this campaign, I think, has like been an area where I've seen, you know, base building and electoral campaigning, you know, really complementary in the city worker space. You know, we've been able to bring in like a ton of people who are excited about Zoran, you know, into our campaign to, you know, get the union endorsement. And, you know, now we have this list that we're able to activate, you know, going into our contract negotiations. So, you know, I think it's really just a matter of like making the argument that like these campaigns can be effective, you know, for base building and vice versa.
Yeah, they can be. You just have to do the work of following up with people. If you think about it, an electoral campaign is only active for a very relatively short amount of time. What do people do when that's not happening? If the idea is that they're just sitting around waiting for the next campaign, then that's not building anything. That's not building any capacity to organize.
Right. So I think it'd be good to kind of move on now to the question of Zionism and Palestine, which is obviously incredibly important to this election. I think, you know, a lot of people kind of responded to the fact that it brought up so much by saying like, oh, why are we even talking about this in a New York mayoral election? Like, you know, this is a foreign conflict. This doesn't impact the lives of New Yorkers. But the reality is like, you got to think of New York City almost more like a kind of like international city state. It's obviously not a country, but it kind of almost is. Like it's it's a center of global financial power, almost like a Venetian city-state. And it's also got a huge Jewish population, which is, unfortunately, very largely Zionist. And so there's a lot of Zionist power in New York City. And so it inevitably became a big topic of contention in this debate. And I think it kind of showed you can't just separate cleanly domestic policy from foreign policy, that the international struggle and the domestic class struggle do, in fact, interrelate with each other and are not something that can be cleanly separated. So, actually, I'm going to bring up a clip real quick where Zoran is getting hounded by reporters and all of these different forums about whether he recognizes the right of Israel to exist as a or whether he just simply recognizes the right of Israel to exist. And I think this was his answer.
Because I feel like you did not want to make a definitive statement on this. Do you support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state?
I support Israel's right to exist as a state with equal rights. I believe that every state...
Why not as a Jewish state?
Because I'm not comfortable supporting any state that has a hierarchy of citizenship on the basis of religion or anything else. I think that in the way that we have in this country, equality should be enshrined in every country in the world. That's my belief.
All right, let's talk, because I feel like you...
So, I think that was the second time he answered that question, I believe. Does anyone know?
I'm not sure. I know it wasn't the only time where he engaged with that question in that way. But
Right.
I mean, this is like look how quickly that reporter just shut down. Right. As soon as he throws the question of, "Oh, are you defending ethno states?" It completely makes her fall apart. That was just. We have another
Yes or
one.
no? Do you believe?
Hold on, I think this might have been.
Yes or no? Do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not
As a Jewish state?
No,
As a state with equal rights.
Yes or no? Do you believe in a Jewish state?
Okay, so I think that is.
It's such a gotcha question.
Right.
It's designed specifically for him to trip up on it.
So one of the stories that I tell about this a lot is that there was a time period in American politics, stretched for a couple decades, I think, where any sort of vaguely radical black politician in the U.S. would be asked, "Do you denounce Louis Farrakhan?"
Yeah.
This was a very common thing, and of course, the thing, of course, about denouncing Farrakhan is that of course I denounce Farrakhan. He's a right-wing crank, and so that question, even though it was horrendously racist, only asked to left-wing black politicians. Hillary Clinton even sea-lioned Obama with it in 2008.
Yeah, I remember that.
The point of the question was to associate the black politician with some sort of crazy, some crazy radical ideology. And that's what's going on here, right? It's over the course of this campaign, it's almost become less about Zionism and just more about blatant Islamophobia, right?
Yeah.
That like this guy is getting attacked, he's getting smeared, they're pronouncing his name wrong. Because this is New York, they're making references to 9/11. I'm like, this is my area of study in undergrad. I hope to go to grad school for this someday. Is like, how is 9/11 remembered in American history? A huge chunk of this bookshelf behind me is books on 9/11. But the idea that they think they are going to be able to successfully race bait this guy across all demographics in New York and failed cataclysmically is the core of it. But of course, it goes back to the Zionism question, in that, like, They put all of their eggs. Cuomo put all of the eggs. Global capital put all of its eggs in the basket of tying Zohran Mamdani to Hamas, to being against Israel, being an anti-Semite of every sort of order, and it infected every single thing they do. I remember walking down the street in Ocean Hill, where I live, majority black neighborhood, and seeing these Cuomo mailers strewn all across the street. All of them just say things like anti-Semitism, hates Israel, supports Hamas. This is how Cuomo was campaigning in black neighborhoods.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, do black neighborhoods in New York City really care that much about Hamas?
But that's what they tried to do. And it maybe worked in places where we weren't canvassing, where we did not have the base of resources, like people in communities in the outer boroughs to knock doors. But it did not work in Bed-Stuy. It did, and the reason that it didn't work is because I know I watched the polls the entire day. I was volunteering at the poll sites in my Zohran Mamdani shirt. The older voters who have typically formed the base of the right-wing candidates in elections across New York, they didn't show up. Compared to the 2024 primary election, this electorate was much younger, much more excited, much more mobilized. But I knew there were thousands of people who just did not leave the house to vote that day, in no small part because Cuomo didn't campaign on anything. And of course, we didn't reach a lot of those voters either. But neither did the opposition that normally does. And why was that? Because they focused entirely on the anti-Semitism stuff.
I mean, yeah, how many voters is that going to get you realistically? I mean, there's a lot of Jewish people.
It's really going to get you Jewish voters, as we've learned.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of Jewish people here, but there's still a relative minority, and even they're split on the whole, what's happening in Israel and Palestine. So
yeah, it seems like amongst like younger Jews, like they're just not lining up behind the Zionist ideology in the same way. So,
and it's again, they and really nobody fell for the Islamophobic canards. Like it happened everywhere. It was every single aspect of the campaign, and it has, I think, pretty entirely delegitimized all of this.
Right. I guess the question I want to pose is, what would we say to critics of Zohran who think that he's made too many rhetorical concessions to Zionism?
Well, I think for me, it's very clear is that he responded to discipline, right? So, of course, we have to go back to October 7th when we have like a massive resistance in the United States to Israeli genocide that has been going on for a year and a half of protests, of rallies. There's been a general upsurge. You don't get Zohran Mamdani without that base of people who is in the streets. Right. People like to talk about how the campaign might have moderated on certain things, but he knew there was a limit to how much he could moderate, or all of the volunteers that were sort of being trained and built up by a year of resistance to genocide might suddenly turn on him. And with that, Israel has a right to exist comment, it almost started to happen. And then guess what? A bunch of field leads who run the field operation and a lot of DSA members, including myself, circulated letters that said, hey, we don't like it when you say this. It generated enough steam that I know that I believe the co-chairs of NYC DSA talked to him about this, and suddenly we have him tacking on as a state with equal rights at the end of all of his statements. We have him defending Globalize the Intifada as a reasonable chant that people can and should be using. That doesn't happen without DSA's discipline. that doesn't happen without people saying, building up all of their goodwill after 5 months of campaigning and saying, hey, we trust you, we like you, but we don't like it when you say this, and we are going to show our strength so you don't have to say this anymore. That is so powerful to me. And I know there are a lot of people who are angry out there. I know there are a lot of people who think he didn't do enough and that he could be doing and saying more. And I don't really disagree. But what's important to me is the fact that I know that a DSA member, was able to move him on this question. All future electoral efforts need to remember how this happened.
Yeah, that's important that people know that, I think, is that DSA people actually did push Zoran to kind of change his messaging. And when people did kind of think he was making too many rhetorical concessions, people actually did push back, and it did actually make a difference. So, hold on, I actually have the clip of where he talks about globalizing the Intifada, which has kind of become the slogan
to use to lead the city is that which speaks
left wing
clearly
of
to my
Zoran's
intent.
campaign, you could say.
Give you an opportunity to respond here and now. Do you condemn that phrase, globalize the Intifada?
That's not language that I use. The language that I use and the language that I will continue to use to lead the city is that which speaks clearly to my intent, which is an intent grounded in a belief in universal human rights. And ultimately, that's what is the foundation of so much of my politics, the belief that freedom and justice and safety are things that, to have meaning, have to be applied to all people, and that includes Israelis and Palestinians alike.
But do you actually condemn it? I think that's the question and the
You
outstanding
condemn
issue
it.
that
Condemn
the
it, Zoran, condemn
the
it.
Jewish faith and beyond have. Do you condemn
Throw it
that
into the
phrase,
fire.
globalize the Intifada, which a lot of people hear as a call to violence against Jews?
I've heard from many Jewish New Yorkers who have shared their concerns with me, especially in light of the horrific attacks that we saw in Washington, D.C. and in Boulder, Colorado, about this moment of anti-Semitism in our country and in our city. And I've heard those fears and I've had those conversations, and ultimately they are part and parcel of why in my campaign I've put forward a commitment to increase funding for anti-hate crime programming by 800%. I don't believe that the role of the mayor is to police speech in the manner especially of that of Donald Trump.
Yes, I like that he made that point. It's like, listen, we're not trying to police speech like Donald Trump is over here.
Light and air.
For that very
He's light and
supposed
air.
crime of speech. Ultimately, what I think I need to show is the ability to not only talk about something, but to tackle it and to make clear that there's no room for anti-Semitism in this city. We have to root out that bigotry, and ultimately we do that through the actions, and that is the mayor I will be, one that protects Jewish New Yorkers and lives up to that commitment through the work that I do.
But quickly, for the people who care about the language and who feel really concerned by that phrase, why not just condemn it?
My concern is to start to walk down the line of language and making clear what language I believe is permissible or impermissible takes me into a place similar to that of the president who is looking to do those very kinds of things, putting people in jail for writing an op-ed, putting them in jail for protesting. Ultimately, it's not language that I use. It's language I understand there are concerns about. And what I will do is showcase my vision for the city through my words and my actions.
Let me ask you,
They were trying so hard to get him to condemn it, and he's just like, well, it's not language I use, but, you know.
They asked him like 3 different times the same question.
Yeah. So, now I think that does show bravery right there, I think.
And an extraordinary amount of patience, I'll say.
Yeah, I really do have to say, you know, I got a question here, but I really do got to say, like, Zoran is just, like, probably the most talented, like, rhetorician that DSA has found so far. Like, as far as rhetoric and communication goes, like, he is very good at it. And I've been saying for a while that the left needs to get better at rhetoric. But is this the one you were referring to, Sid?
Yeah. I should talk very quickly about some of the policies that really can be enacted, even though this is, like, in many ways a distraction. Zoran has promised to do a number of very important things. On one hand, he supports BDS. He supports divesting the city from Israel, and that is something that the largest city in the United States absolutely should be doing, and he can do. He also is a supporter of the Not on Our Dime Act, which basically prevents the so-called charities that give weapons to the IDF from earning tax-exempt status, and there are other things the mayor can do to hound them down for supporting war crimes. There are a couple gimmicky ones, like he says he's going to get the NYPD to arrest Netanyahu if he steps.
Yes, that would be nice.
I think is more rhetorical than anything else, but it's definitely something that I'd be campaigning on. But of course, again, it goes back to abolition, right? He is going to make sure the SRG does not brutalize Palestine protesters, or at least he says he will. And that is absolutely something that means a lot here from the standpoint of New York. So in my view, he can actually do quite a great deal in terms of that. I'm sure there's a lot to be done about even like some things about protecting, say, Palestinian charities, protecting people who are sending money to their families, sending money to charities, from getting harassed by other branches of government. Let's say there are a number of important things that can happen here.
Yeah, it's like people were saying like, oh, like how are people going to react when like Zoran like starts like shooting protesters or whatever, like when he like sends the cops on protesters like day one. But it's like, what if he doesn't? What if he decides to do the opposite as mayor? That's very much possible. And it's actually something that you mentioned, the Special Resource Group, or the SRG is what it's called. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
That's actually something that hasn't been brought up a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the NYPD has a unit specifically for beating up protesters, right? They've been doing this since George Floyd in 2020. They did it at Columbia. They did it at universities across the city. They did it in Bay Ridge. It has grown completely out of hand. And I think actually getting rid of it, as he has promised to do, would be a very big step in dismantling part of the NYPD police culture, right?
Yeah.
But like the point of getting rid of the worst aspects of the NYPD is hopefully to force him and the city council into a larger, more public battle over what the police do. I just want to make sure he continues that fight as we begin to advance through these stages.
Yeah, and there's also the plan to do the public grocery stores, which is that's the one thing that the anti-communist people are all freaking out about. Oh, he's gonna turn New York City into Havana, which I mean,
the bread lines.
Don't threaten us with a good time. You think that that's gonna have any success? Means to be able to pull that one off?
Sorry, I think he's cutting off.
Did we lose someone here?
We might have lost Donald.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
I think he's back.
Yeah, I think I'm back now. My connection messed up, but yeah, I think I said something about the state-owned grocery stores.
Yeah, we didn't hear much.
Yeah, I was saying, do you think he's actually going to be able to pull that off and make that work out? Because my understanding is he has to have cooperation from the state governor, right?
For the city-owned grocery stores, I don't think so. The point is to do them on land the city already owns. He'll need cooperation from the state to do free buses, I think. Okay. But I actually don't expect that to be a big challenge. He's already succeeded in twisting some arms about doing a pilot program. The city-owned grocery stores, it's a big bureaucratic lift, and I'm really hoping he's able to accomplish it, but I think it's definitely possible. I think the big thing that we need to really concern ourselves with, though, is just the question of transformative change at the governmental level. Because I think one of the things that we ended up running into really across the campaign is that the four big planks that canvassers are supposed to use, freezing the rent, free childcare, free buses, city-owned grocery stores, those four, they're all very economistic in form. They are very specific short-term economic demands that are things the mayor can easily control,
Right.
mostly can pull the levers of power himself to do, but ultimately are often in many ways limited in terms of the possibilities, right? That like he can do those things alone, he can do them. But Bill de Blasio did a rent freeze. That's happened in the past.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we need to be devoting ourselves to over the next 6 months is sort of the idea of what kind of figuring out what kind of office we want him to be leaving in either 4 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And I think for me, for the standpoint of Marxist Unity Group, that means things related to city democracy. That right now in New York, unlike many other American cities, New York has an extremely powerful mayor. The mayor can control a lot of things ranging from the schools to the police to literally the rent on rent-stabilized apartments. All of those are controlled very autocratically by whoever holds the mayor's office. And I think one of the things that we need to do in DSA is to take a step back from some of these economic demands now that the campaign is over, and really start shifting to some of the political demands. To think about, we need to reform the city charter. Can we get Zoran to start to revise the city charter, essentially do a constitutional convention for New York? Maybe. We got to fight for it, though. Can we get Zoran to fight to restore proportional representation that the city council here used to have, something that allowed many socialists and communists to be elected in the past? Can Zoran devolve some of the mayor's powers to the city council, which is, of course, a much more representative and democratic legislative body, much closer to the people? Can Zoran abolish some of the other executive offices and return those powers to city council? All of those, or at least make them appointed, or make them subject to the mayor rather than be independent. All of those things, I think, are opportunities that we need to be taking when the campaign is at a bit of a lull right now. We're not trying to go hard on some of these economic issues. Now we should be taking this moment to transform, or to give Zoran an idea of what transforming the city can look like. And I think DSA's Democracy Working Group in New York City is working on something to this effect. Of course, Marxist Unity is hoping to pass a resolution compelling DSA to support some of these positions. Because, of course, it's never going to be enough for one mayor to do all of this. We need a transformative political movement backed by the working class in New York. Oh yes, thank you. Somebody in the chat has mentioned that Democracy Working Group is working on this right now. This is some very, very important work. If you are in New York City, now is the chance to get involved in the Democracy Working Group. It's a new working group it's a new working group that was just chartered within New York City DSA. Cool things are happening there. If you want to become a part of something, if you want to be part of the deliberations, if you were on the campaign and you don't know where to go, Democracy Working Group's a pretty good place.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, the most exciting thing about this campaign to me wasn't really the economic stuff, which, I mean, obviously more affordable New York City is good. Like, we all want more, treats. We all want, that good old abundance. But it was the fact that he took on a political dynasty in an insanely undemocratic system run by, that was dominated by the imperialist Zionist lobby. So I think that's what really, to me, was the most impressive aspect. And I think, I think it probably was smart that Zoran focused so much on economic demands to the extent that he did. Like, I think there was a strategy there that he was doing, being like laser focused on affordability, and when people try to bring up other things, bring it back to his core message. And I think there was a smart strategy. And I think it did help his popularity, and I think it did resonate. But I think there is an economism there that shied away from the serious political question of who runs New York City, who actually runs New York City, not just who holds the office of the mayor, but what is the actual ruling class of the city. But I think that relates to the question of the NYPD as well. Where is the real power? So I think I guess that's what my main critique of Zoran's campaign would kind of be or my suggestion would be of kind of where to move forward.
I think we're in agreement on this, frankly. I think we have an excellent opportunity to do this, and I hope we can.
All right, Sid. I think you got to get going soon. Any last things you want to say, or any final statements or anything? Any final questions, Joseph? Any comments?
Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to ask about the general, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not worried about it. I think the thing that I am worried about for the general is simply that the fact that Zoran Mamdani is going to win the general election because there is a big blue D next to his name. He does not need to play that up very much in order to win. The voters will do their thing. He's already popular. I'm worried that he is going to lean into that more than he should. I think that would be my big concern. Zoran Mamdani is a DSA member. He's a democratic socialist. He does not like the Democratic Party. I think he believes the Democratic Party can be reformed, I'm sure, but much less than some other DSA members think it can be. So I'm really hoping he will be able to he will resist the liquidationist temptation and lean into the Democratic Socialist label more now that he has a pretty firm mandate.
And I hope he does, because a lot of people in my age group that I've spoken to are precisely excited about that prospect that he's going to break from the mainstream Democrats on, a lot of high politics questions. So he's hoping.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that he doesn't. Let's hope that he doesn't have too much hope in reforming the Democrats and sees this as a step towards a new party, because it's what we need. It's absolutely what we need.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really wonderful experience getting to talk to you again today. I had a wonderful time previously on the stream talking about the campaign while it was in progress, and now this phase of it has ended. And it's exciting to see where we go from here. The thing that I will say is that today is the last day to sign on to resolutions, amendments to resolutions at the National DSA Convention. Marxist Unity Group has a number of resolutions that we're trying to get people to sign to make sure we have a real politically programmatic way forward, especially in the presidential election. And I really recommend going to Marxist Unity Group's Twitter, and if you are a DSA member, to sign on. And if you are not a DSA member, now is a very good time to join.
Yeah, just join DSA, guys.
Just join DSA. Join
Not
DSA.
selling your soul.
If you hate DSA, if you like whining about DSA, join DSA anyways. Guess what? We like whining about it too.
I don't think any of us have stopped.
DSA more than us.
We haven't stopped whining about DSA since we joined. You're free to do that.
Yeah.
You'll find plenty to whine about, believe me.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thank you all so much.
So thanks for coming on, Sid, and we'll be having you on again give more updates on this campaign, because you're our soldier on the ground.
There will be more.
Definitely. Solidarity, comrade. And I think Jack is going to be coming back on. I actually have a campaign for a fundraiser for Gaza that I want to bring attention to, that a friend of mine has posted about. So hold on, let me bring it up real quick. Here we go. So yeah, it's this is for Hussein and his friends and family in Gaza. They're trying to raise money for food supplies, baby formula, other just essential products. Obviously, there are a lot of fundraisers going around, but I know this one is legit because it has been recommended to me by someone that I greatly trust and has personal connections to people in Gaza. So if you're looking for a good fundraiser, you have extra money to contribute to. Let me actually put it up on the screen itself. This would be a good one to give to if you want to donate to Gaza right now. And like I said, I know it's legit because someone I very much trust has pointed it to me. And genocide in Gaza is obviously very extreme right now. And the Israelis have blocked aid. Pestilence and famine is taking over. So obviously any money that you can give helps a lot. And yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to give attention to this. I have it at $1,600, $16,000. So yeah, I guess while we wait for Jack to come on, we can look at some more of these clips that I had prepared for this show. But yeah, no, I'm definitely worried that Zoran is going to move in the Democratic realignment direction, if I'm going to be honest. Like I'm seeing the media talk about this and how this is like Robert Reich is talking about how this is like a new direction for the Democrats. And something that occurred to me is that this Zoran kind of is like everything that the right wing accused Obama of being, right? Like he's Muslim, he's a socialist, he's foreign born.
Yeah. I think I'm also sort of worried about it. I think what makes me less worried though is that I think there are definite limits that the Democratic Party has for adopting that sort of model. Like one limit is that some of the things that he's talking about seriously threaten the fundamental interests of that party and the people who support it. The other thing I think is that Democrats in general are very weary of activating, masses of people in a way that they can't control. But then it's also going to depend, for example, on the people advising Zoran. And, I think that, Sid mentioned that he was, he's amenable to be pushed on things, but I think that there are also people advising him that are probably more realignment oriented. And sort of want to put the pin on the discussion that this is the first step towards a new independent party.
Yeah. I think because we know that the DSA faction that's most kind of aligned with Zoran and the most kind of behind Zoran is kind of the SMC ground, where the right wing of DSA have kind of been obviously, it's all of DSA has been in the streets. Really, this has been something that pretty much like even people who were skeptical of Zoran were unified around him once the campaign began. But like, it's the right wing of DSA. I do think kind of are more in control of this than other factions of DSA, but the extent to which they themselves believe in realignment versus the belief that we're building a party surrogate that can one day become an independent party, I think, is also something that the DSA right is kind of contesting. Like, I think. Like I said, like you said, there's a danger that the DSA, but there's other people as well who are that he might be listening to. So it's definitely a concern. And there's a problem that they could domesticate him, basically. And there's a problem. There's something that I'm kind of worried that they can try to domesticate anti-Zionism.
Well, initially it was when after October 7th and the Palestine protest movement got reactivated. There was a concern from the chapter leadership of being too gung-ho, especially after that action with PSL and the incident with the swastika at the protest. I don't know if you remember this, but the DSA got blasted by the Post naturally about it, and they got super freaked out. They didn't want to do like any public Palestine actions for a little while at least.
Hold on, I think I lost my connection while you were talking. So this was this the DSA protest that was like after October 7th?
Right.
Where
it was like directly after. It was I think mostly organized by PSL. We sort of signed on. I think there was like, some fuckhead at the thing with the swastika or something, and that got picked up by the Post.
Right, but there was also a PSL guy at the protest who like made a joke about hipsters getting blown up at the music festival.
Yeah, I think that was part of it.
And that got picked up. Yeah. And that was
got some connection problems.
we'll have to wait and see. Fuck. Did Jack just come in? I think I heard something.
I think he's just about to get on.
Nice.
But yeah, I never quite understood the hysteria about the Post. I mean, the Post is gonna they're gonna print the worst things. Invariably, they're gonna do that.
Right. Well, this is the issue. This is something I wanted to say earlier. Is like DSA doesn't have its own press. Like we have Democratic Left, which is entirely internally focused and purposely so, and we have Socialist Forum, which is also entirely internally focused. We have no outwardly facing press that like aims to educate the public and put forward our own narrative about public events.
Yeah, and I think we desperately need it.
Yeah, that's absolutely desperately needed. And like DSA people, like they get like upset about the idea of even like making statements about public events. Like the idea that like the leadership of DSA should like, we talked about this in the last stream, but like the idea that like the leadership of DSA should like even make like public statements about like world events of massive historical importance, like war in Iran, for example, is like frowned upon. It's like, oh, why are we making statements when we should be like organizing or whatever? Like, so like there's this idea of materialism that people have where it's like symbolic communication and communicating ideas is idealism. It's not important. That's not where change happens. That's just ethereal. It's in the air. It's magical. It's not real. And then there's materialism, which is like when you do the real work, which is economic gains and stuff like that. And that's kind of like this vulgar DSA materialism, I think. And so through this theory, like something like a public facing press campaign or having like public facing press that you actually fund just doesn't really make sense because, well, what's the point if we're like campaigning and like winning like, you know, material reforms? That does the job of educating people and building class consciousness. We don't need to like put forward our ideas and put forward our narratives to educate people because we're doing the real work of winning economic demands. But I don't think that's going to work.
No, and I don't think that you change people's minds simply by running good campaigns for material reforms. You know, ideas have to be argued for ultimately. Obviously, there has to be an organized movement behind it. But I don't know where this idea comes from that like by addressing political questions directly that you're somehow neglecting organizing. I mean, it's part of the same process.
Right. It's American activist brain. Like there really is like something America brained about it. Like
I do think that part of it is bending the stick in the other direction against against pure, I guess, agitation, against the idea that you just have to get on a soapbox and communicate the most radical ideas, and then people will naturally, march behind you.
Right, which is something that the left has been kind of doing and failing at as well. Like, I mean, but Jack is back.
What's up, guys? Sorry for the in and out today. What are we talking?
No, you're good. You're good. So yeah, we were just talking about how DSA, like about the New York Post and stuff, and how like DSA doesn't really have like a forward-facing.
Yeah. Oh, I think he cut off. But like how DSA doesn't seem to be proactively building a sort of media in order to present the counter narrative to a lot of these ideas that are, these right-wing ideas that are sort of offered.
Yeah, I mean, there's even like internal tension there. I think, like the Socialist Majority Caucus folks are probably the most bought into the kind of, realignment strategy that would lend itself towards, just kind of liquidating into the Democratic Party. The groundwork folks, I think, are ostensibly a little more interested in putting forward, political independence, but I think even they are, just in the name of realpolitik, probably not so interested in, putting forward as strong a message as we would like. But then there's just, where's the political will for it to happen in New York City, nationally? I mean, we have Socialist Forum, we have Democratic Left, but it really isn't at the scale that we need. Jacobin is maybe the closest thing that we have. But, the Zorn administration does pose some interesting opportunities there because ostensibly he will have a whole host of, comms apparatus just through the mayor's office. So, maybe that is an opportunity to put that stuff forward. But, it's not just about having the structure. It's about having the political will to kind of, push for that stuff. And so, we'll just have to see who the people are. But I don't know. What do you all think is the right avenue for, putting forward our independent political message? Like, what's the path to, independent media for DSA?
Well, I think DSA should fund its press, which I think, next convention will be a little bit closer to that. But I think, that's obviously my biased answer. But
I do think we need like a robust press. I think the idea here is persistently attacking these talking points that emanate from like the right wing. And I mean, fundamentally, you need to be agenda setting in the sense that, I don't know how many people read newspapers anymore. You might run into some trouble with like a paper press, but I think that DSA, for example, is they can do like sort of like an AMLO thing, like a daily sort of like stream or something. What I'm saying is you don't have to produce newspapers. You can produce other forms of media, audio visual media, clips, streams, daily shows that, attack the narrative consistently on a daily basis. That can get
I mean,
blasted.
Chavez was great at this, like in Venezuela, there's kind of famous, I think, like Hola Presidente or something like that, where like he would go live for like hours and hours just taking, calls from constituents and, talking through their issues and things like that. And I mean, Zoran's got some of that in him. Like when I watched his victory speech, there was this line where he was like, you may not agree with everything that I say, but like, my promise to you is that, I'll always hear you out. I'll always listen to you. And like, he definitely has some of that, like, Chavez, like, listen to people. I mean, the one I think of also is like Obama, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
like,
that's the thing is
that.
like, I was saying this before you were on, but he's like the rightoids all accuse Obama of being Muslim, socialist, or communist, and foreign born. Well, we got the real deal here. Like,
we got the real deal, man. I mean, we were talking about
is
the NYPD.
He's better than Obama at rhetoric and communication. Like, he's actually better than Obama.
Yes, I think he's a lot more dynamic for sure.
But he does, have that Obama vibe in a way. He's better. I like it more. I can get more down with it than Obama. It's less cringe than Obama, but it's more Obama than it is like a Chavez, like Caesarite, like Bonapartist, like kind of thing, where it's like I'm the strong man of New York City, and I'm gonna take down these corrupt, blood-sucking parasites, and whether you like it or not, he's more of like, I'm going to unite this city and universal human rights, and it's very much like a kind of very pluralistic and open and unifying message, rather than a kind of dividing message where he's trying to like create a sharp friend enemy distinction. And
yeah,
it's not really populism. I don't think it's not really a populist campaign. I wouldn't call it, which is not a critique in either of my opinions. I'm not really a fan of. I think.
Did we lose Donald?
We might have lost them.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been thinking about the constituency that Zoran's been able to win over as, being very, very impressive. Like, from the NYPD, the rank and file NYPD, all the way to like, the abundance people, to the like, even some of the conservative, like Jewish community. I don't know if we talked about this already, but there was I think a rabbi from the conservative Jewish community in New York who said, I talked to Zoran, and I think that I'm confident that he's not anti-Semitic. I talked to him; he's not anti-Semitic. So I do think like he has that ability to, it's a classic political skill, to like, make somebody feel like you're on their side when you have a conversation with them, and make you feel like you're their friend. Like, I think he's like a real master at that. But at the same time, I do think there are some, differences, between him and Obama, where I do have more faith in his kind of a, commitment to at least his understanding of democratic socialist politics and, DSA cadre politics. It might not be the understanding I have, but it is more than Obama, where, I think Obama did, come from some, movement organization, but was not nearly as like, committed to a political organization as Zoran is.
Right. He seems a lot more accessible than Obama was.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, I don't know if you guys talked about it, but like when he did that sort of, walking from the tip of the Bronx uptown all the way to the bottom of Manhattan, and like there's this kind of throng of, people who kind of come and join and things like that. It's definitely like a symbol of his ability to like bring people together, and like, especially like young people, I don't know, Joseph, like if, you live uptown, I know historically DSA has had issues, reaching, like the Black and brown working class communities of like, uptown. And, I think that's still a challenge that we face, but it does seem like, there is some like sort of popular momentum, at least amongst like youth, across the city. But I'd be interested in your perspective on that, Joseph, like uptown, if you've like seen or heard any, what the conversation is like around Zoran.
I think uptown, well, he didn't do that many events uptown. I think he only really managed to get up here towards the final like couple of weeks or so. But I think there was a lot of excitement for it. If I think that if he had prioritized it, I mean, I understand that you only have so much time, but if he had prioritized it earlier, I think he would have made more of a impression. I think his biggest, I think demerit uptown is just that a lot of people don't know who he is. Whenever people say stuff like, well, DSA doesn't do well with certain groups, you always have to ask, like, well, I mean, these groups are themselves split up by contradictions. So, for example, Black and brown people uptown in the Bronx, what you're really talking about, if you're talking about a lot of older people. You're talking about a lot of people who lean conservative, or more so lean towards the Democratic Party as a vehicle for their political, for their politics or whatever. I think, for example, like the young people uptown are pretty excited about him from what I've seen. I just think it's a matter of making more appearances and, getting out here more. I think people will come to know him, and I think he can maybe assuage the older people.
Well, he did have that appearance with Miro, right, from the Jesus and Miro show.
Yeah, that was actually not too far from here. I missed it though.
Uptown legends, Jesus and Miro, and Miro, I think, was in the street with Zoran, uptown, talking to the kind of young people in the neighborhood. But yeah, definitely, it is like, I do share your assessment that there's a lot more work to be done. But it does seem like there are opportunities that we haven't had in the chapter to do that kind of work. Because Zoran can be this legitimizing force. Of course, there's the risk of if things go bad and he's unable to deliver on his promises, or like there's another George Floyd protest moment and he's unable to kind of meet that moment, then there will be challenges. But I think you're right, Joseph. It is like name recognition on some level is DSA's biggest problem, the socialist left's biggest problem. Like people just don't know that we exist. And I think that's changing, especially amongst younger people. Like, I was, hanging out with some of my wife's friends this weekend, and none of them are DSA members. Some of them, don't even live in the city, don't even live in New York. And, all of them were asking me about the Zoran campaign and, talking about how much they love him, how much they love his wife, like, how excited they are. One of them even mentioned, and, these aren't like people who are in political organizations. One of them even mentioned, said like, I hope he doesn't become like another AOC, and this is just like a, like a pretty like, I don't want to say normal, but just like a, not politically active, like a young person in their, 30s. So I do think like the, consciousness awareness, amongst young people is like closer than we might think, in terms of like, independent socialist politics and kind of the model that we would like to see. I think older people is I think a bigger challenge. I wonder, Joseph, like, what do you think it would take for Zoran to, build, kind of connections, or for DSA to build connections, to build lasting organization, especially amongst kind of like, older demographics, in the city.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of being much more active in where they are. that whole thing about meeting people where they're at. You really do have to meet people where they're at. I think that DSA, they get a whole lot of people in places like, central northern Brooklyn. And I think for a lot of people, it's particularly associated with like transplants who move to New York City. And not so much them, not super known or active in the areas where some of the more longer standing residents live. And essentially what that means is that the existing patronage networks that exist for mobilizing communities and a number of people go completely unseated. It's completely ceded to the Democratic Party and those clubs basically. So I think the first step would be to like get uptown and get uptown not just for when you're conducting a campaign, not just for when you're canvassing. There's a lot of organizing work that happens uptown, like tenant organizing, for example. That's a really good opportunity to connect with people who are organizing, for example, tenant associations, and talking to them about what what that movement could look like if it linked up with a supercharged Zoran administration that's willing to back them up. It's a hard question because there's also like a generational cultural difference. I think a lot of older people, just for context, Donald, we're talking about how Zoran could do better with like older people demographics that I guess he isn't very popular with. But I think a lot of that is just talking to them and sort of
cast them to the side. History will forget them.
Yeah, one reactionary mass.
I mean, I'm kind of not kidding, but like there is a sense in which like maybe we should just like focus on the people that like, we know we can win and then work from there, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is like, the merger formula, right? Like we want to merge the socialist movement with the workers movement. And like, I think there is a lot of like, maybe there's not a big workers movement uptown, but I do think there is like a big, like the most evictions are in the Bronx, like the shittiest landlords are in the Bronx. Like, all this terrible shit is happening in these like fucking, slumlord buildings in the Bronx, especially. And like, we don't really have a presence there. We don't really have organization there. So those people seem like people we really would want to kind of build with. And like historically, the left in New York City has been very strong, in places like Harlem. So, I do think those are like people that I would want to, outreach to. But, the thing about freezing the rent, the Rent Guidelines Board, rent stabilized housing, like I think that's like an opportunity. At the same time, it's like it's worth pointing out that like Bill de Blasio, the progressive mayor, before Eric Adams, our current mayor, he also pushed for a rent freeze. And many of the sort of economic demands that Zoran is promoting are, essentially like carbon copies of the de Blasio kind of progressive platform. I think that to me, the difference is like, well, how are you going about fighting for these kinds of things? And if he's really intentional about, building a movement, building organization around these kinds of demands, then I think we could start to see, some differences there. But it does, I think, it'll be interesting to see how the campaign responds. I know I've seen folks kind of calling for, I don't know if we talked about this already, but, I think Eric Blanc and some others have sort of started calling for like, let's keep the energy of the Zoran campaign going by launching these kind of like petitioning campaigns for the kind of, freeze the rent, free buses, universal child care, public grocery stores, petitioning campaigns to fight for these kinds of demands that are somewhat independent of DSA, that are kind of run like through the campaign apparatus. And then there have been sort of folks who are picking up on that conversation and suggesting like, not only do we need like a campaign that's sort of broader, than DSA and independent, but we need a broader organization that can bring in people who are maybe not ready to join DSA, but who do like Zoran and who like his platform. And I'm a little skeptical about those efforts, if I'm being totally honest. Just it seems like kind of a duplication of resources, and like, you're kind of reinventing the wheel with something that's like not as honest about what we're fighting for. But all this to say, I do think like there's a lot of open questions about, what how we will take advantage of this kind of like moment of consciousness. And it's incumbent on us, I think, as Sid kind of hammered on, incumbent on us to push for what we want to see.
Yeah, I think this is a time to push for what we want to see, not to just be haters. I think that's what people. It's like seeing some leftists, like their plan is like, what we need to do is wait for Zoran to inevitably fail, and then we can sweep in and radicalize everyone by explaining that revolution is actually the answer. But it's like, no, that's not like. That's
typically not how it goes. Like,
that's how every sectoid thinks they're going to like win, and
right,
it never works because no one has any reason to listen to you. Why should they listen to you? That's always my answer to you people. Why should anybody listen to you? You're just a random guy who thinks that you know all this stuff because you read some pamphlets. Why should anyone listen to you? You have to establish credibility.
I mean, that's kind of the problem for us now, even in terms of like, not even thinking like, fuck Zoran. Like even people who are like, we like the Zoran campaign and we want him to do this, that, and the other thing. Like, the Socialist Majority Caucus folks, like they helped him get fucking elected, So like they have the credibility to say, look, this is how we should do it. Marxist Unity Group's been involved. Other factions have been involved, but I don't think we have like a winning pitch just yet to give to him. And I don't think we've figured out what that winning pitch is. I think it involves like, building a movement that's somewhat independent of the campaign and then saying, look, like this idea that we have is an idea that's already popular and this is the potential and this is the value add for your campaign. I think we need to, he's a DSA cadre candidate and I do think he will be responsive to the organization, but like, the SMC folks who run the chapter, they're not going to be pushing him very hard. And so I think the next couple of months are going to be really key for us to come up with some good ideas, put our heads together. And I don't totally have a set idea just yet. One I'm very excited about, which I don't know if we've discussed yet, is the charter revision. Have we talked about that yet on the stream?
Very, very brief. Well, we didn't really get into it, but it was brought up.
So yeah, I mean, the city charter is basically like the constitution for the city. It establishes, how people are elected, the structure of the council, the mayor, who has power to do what. And the mayor has the power to appoint committees to revise the charter. And, usually it's around some kind of, dumb procedural reform stuff that I'm not enough of a wonk to really understand. But, I do think that there are like, opportunities to really like push for more politically transformative demands within our city that, push beyond kind of like economic quality of life issues and start to get into the issues of like why things are fucked up, like in the city, why things are the way they are, the power of the mayor to make appointments, the lack of proportional representation on the council, the inability of non-citizens to vote, all these kinds of like big, high political demands that, if passed through a charter revision, we could bring proportional representation to New York City again. We could bring back kind of the Socialist Party era of New York City politics, through a kind of charter revision. It's just a matter of convincing the Zoran, administration that something like that is worth pursuing. And I think the argument I would make is, in order to accomplish these economic demands, we need to transform our political system.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to prove that to him, and make that argument to him and his team.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, like I said earlier, that's my main critique of the Zoran campaign is just a lack of a critique of the political system of New York City. And I think it's just part of the problem is there's only so much you can do in a mayorship to actually change that. So it's definitely, I did not know about the charter thing, Jack. So that's actually promising that there actually will be potential opportunities to push things in that direction. But yeah, it's exciting stuff.
If we could get proportional representation, that could be big for DSA.
Yeah.
And we can begin to, actually stack city council and then shift the sort of balance of forces here to a more favorable thing. You know?
It would be funny if New York City has like a Paris Commune type revolution, and Donald Trump has to send in the National Guard to crush the New York Commune.
I mean, that's definitely a risk. Like, I do think that, the Trump admin, if Zoran, even if he doesn't push for a lot of, transformative demands, but he just starts talking, if he reasserts New York City's sanctuary city status, Eric Adams basically was strong-armed by Brian Homan, I forget the last name, but the DHS, head, Department of Homeland Security head. There was that meeting with Eric Adams where he basically was on TV with him, and he said, the Homeland Security guy was like, Eric Adams is going to do what we say, or else, basically, threatened him on live TV. But if Zoran doesn't, acquiesce to those threats, and he reasserts New York City's right to sanctuary city status, I could see a lot of shit coming down from the federal administration for sure.
Trump already said he's going to cut federal funding to New York City if Zoran gets elected.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how, I work in, Section 8 housing, and I don't know how much more they could cut our funding. They're already really they're pushing really heavy cuts, across the country. They are kind of setting up for attacks on corruption and DEI and things like that. So I could definitely see that expanding. To me, a challenge is okay, Zoran is probably going to face a ton of, repression or attacks from the NYPD, from the business community, from the police, from, the Trump administration. And there's going to be a lot of mobilizations to defend him, which we should do. But I think the challenge will be to, not just be in a defensive posture, but, have a positive alternative, continue to fight for aspects of our program. When I was in the exchange program between DSA and the Brazilian Workers' Party, that was something that the comrades in the Brazilian Workers' Party mentioned quite a bit. The sort of free Lula campaigning that they did when Lula was put in jail, or even just the process, the campaign process of electing someone and then, getting right back on that treadmill to fight for their reelection. There is this kind of tendency, when you're in power, to want to just kind of maintain the power that you have rather than use that power to push for more. And so I think that is something that will be a bit of a tension or a bit of a question, that we'll face is how will we balance these kind of defensive campaigns that we'll need to mobilize for, with kind of our positive program, the things that we want to kind of see happen in the city. We haven't seen it yet, but I do think that's almost certainly gonna happen. And given how the chapter really has our electeds with kid gloves, I think they will definitely be really, really pushing us to defend them, and even could use these lines to sort of stifle criticism. If the campaign does kind of not necessarily meet the programmatic aims that we have as an organization.
Bro, Jack, are you on a skateboard?
I know. I'm just walking. I'm walking in beautiful downtown Brooklyn right now. I'm on my way to the City Workers for Zoran barbecue.
Oh, hell yeah.
In Prospect
Beautiful
Park.
Downtown Brooklyn, and what is to be the future commune.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen is Trump is going to send in the National Guard, but the National Guard is going to mutiny and form the real, and that's what's going to become the people's militia. That's going to replace the NYPD.
That would be sick, man. That would be sick. I mean, it's I don't know. Did we talk about this yet? I think you were kind of mentioning this a little bit, Joseph, but the ways that the Zoran campaign can sort of, springboard into more control of the council and more control of the city. Right now, New York City DSA is a really bit player on the council. We have 2 members on the city council. And we're a pretty bit player in the assembly as well. But, are there downstream effects of this, electoral campaign, in terms of can we get some other council members in other districts elected?
Yes.
Can we really start to build the bench electeds. That's another opportunity that I think is quite exciting, just because like Zoran has so much more name recognition and awareness and like ability to draw big crowds and campaigns and stuff like that now. The window really opens for a lot of different stuff now.
I really hope that's the lesson that people are drawing, that, you know, we can start to actually take these seats.
I think so. I mean, the question is what to do with them. I think that will be the place where there's probably a little more disagreement. You know, like elect them to do what? And, you know, this whole realignment thing, I mean, that's been really like, you know, as much as I'm excited, like some of that stuff has been pretty concerning to see.
Yeah. Like a lot of the takeaways I'm seeing from this are saying like, well, Zoran won because he was able to do like a popular front with liberals like Brad Lander, and he was able to appeal to the abundance liberals. Like I've actually seen people like give a lot of credit to like the fact that he like did an interview with like that Derek Thompson guy and like had some like shout outs to abundance, and like I don't think that had like any impact on him winning whatsoever. But like there are a lot of people in the liberal wonk sphere who like really want to like make that the lesson. Not like it's possible to like defeat the Zionists, now we don't have to like no-toe to their fucking bullshit, but that like actually the left, you know, can actually get places, but only if it unites with liberals in the correct way, you know. That seems to,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, you know, Brad Landers, you know, kind of like co-endorsement and co-campaigning. Like I've heard people say kind of similarly, like, oh, the fact that Lander is supporting Zoran suggests that, you know, Zoran is serious about governance and, you know, things like that. And, oh, he should make, you know, Lander the first deputy mayor because, you know, he's such a good progressive guy or whatever. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a factor, but I'm kind of inclined to agree with you, Donald, that it is a little secondary. I mean, maybe the broad thread connecting it is like Zoran's ability to like really speak to, you know, to everyone and kind of be he is a bit of a Rorschach test. Like, I think it is like, you see what you want in him. But honestly, like, I don't know, the realignment shit, like, it's not going to happen. The Democrats aren't going to want that. Like, they are going to want to kind of ride his coattails. Like, you know, it's interesting, like, you know, I don't know if we talked about this yet, but like the India Walton scenario, right? Where India Walton, sort of, you know, progressive mayoral candidate in Buffalo, won the primary, lost in the general to a write-in campaign by some, you know, centrist Democrat who basically, you know, won over the business community, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's a concern that you could have for Zoran in the general, but like all the fucking like, you know, big Brooklyn Democrats, Jerry Nadler, like, you know, the 32 BJ, like these like kind of very conservative unions are all kind of lining up behind him now. So I don't think we're going to see the India Walton scenario here. But I don't know. I just
They're going to try to domesticate him, Jack, is what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to make him, you know, make his anti-Zionism into like the most vague, platitudinous, like kind of like, well, equal rights is good, you know, and you know, I'm not saying he's there already, but like I do think they are really going to try to like domesticate him as much as possible, which is why we got to push back, you know.
Yeah,
like, we can't be doomers. We got to be realistic about the dangers, and we got to treat this as a live fight, I think, is the message that we got to have here. But
yeah, totally. And I mean, the abundance people aren't wrong. Like, Zoran's housing platform is basically the abundance platform. You know, I hate to say it, but it is kind of true. It's the classic, like, his platform is really just like, I don't know, build X number of units in X years, which is like the thing that all the liberals kind of say when they're campaigning.
Yeah.
You know, I want to build X units in X years. So the fear is definitely there. I mean, even like, I think that they're doing a little 3D chess and kind of, you know, maneuvering this way already. But, you know, I think there are structural limitations to that model that we'll run into. And, you know, as a city worker myself, like, I feel somewhat optimistic that, like, we have a lot of very smart and militant activists in the public sector right now who are, like, you know, people who are, you know, working on the front lines, developing policies, understand, what it takes to get something done, but also like the limitations of, city work.
Yeah.
And so like, and like we're in contact with the campaign. And so I think that there are like opportunities for us to push things in a different direction. If we're able to kind of get our shit together.
Yeah, Jamil popped in to say, my old boss who is Dutch loves him, and he's a multi-millionaire. Sees him as just a European style lib. Just funny, there are rich people who like Zoran. Like there was like a thing going on online about how like Wall Street, like people who lived on Wall Street, which is like an incredibly small amount of people anyway, like voted for him. And so like ACP people were like, this is evidence that Zoran is backed by international finance capital. New Obama, But we need those class traders. We need those class traders who have that big money. We need big money movers on our side, honestly. Not our class base. They're not, who we seek to organize, but they are people that we welcome their presence if they wish to submit to the discipline of the proletariat.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't see. Maybe I'm too like bought into the Zoran campaign, and I'm kind of like these liberals who are like, oh, he's gonna do everything that I say. But I just don't get the sense like that he's someone who's like, like I think he's a pragmatist. Yeah. And I think he wants to get stuff done, and he wants to be like a mayor that can deliver on his promises.
Yeah.
But I don't see him as someone who's just kind of like a weather vane type person. And I do see him as like someone who is committed to DSA and the project. But maybe that runs the risk of personalizing the analysis a little too much, because ultimately, like when you become the mayor, you have to appoint all these, heads of state, like the head of my agency, the head of the parks department, like all these, high level administrative positions that will need to be filled. And, I've heard rumblings that folks in consideration include, a lot of the folks at de Blasio had, a lot of folks in the revolving door of, nonprofit, private sector, foundation, all the kind of regular names. And if those are the people that are appointed and there's not, a ton of like pushing them in other directions and kind of capitulating to their expertise, then we have some problems. Even if Zoran is, not telling people to capitulate or do things the same way, it could just very well happen by nature of the commissioners of the agencies being the same as they were under de Blasio.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we need a party. So we have staff, we have cadres that we can appoint at these positions, people, that we have the human material that we can draw upon. And I think DSA is in that awkward position where it's like, well, we kind of have to be that party, but we're not actually that party. But I don't know. So one thing you mentioned earlier is that SMC does still believe in realignment, because I was kind of under the impression that like even the right wing of DSA doesn't fully like go for realignment as much as it used to.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I mean, it's definitely like the campaign is messaging that way, and the campaign is closest to the Socialist Majority Caucus. I don't know if they're dead set on realignment, or if like their sort of like party surrogate based strategy is effectively realignment. I mean, it's like what is it, David DeHaldy's idea of like the dirty stay, where it's like we're not trying to dirty break, but we're just kind of gonna stay. It's like, well, I don't know, functionally, like I guess maybe the difference is you're not necessarily speaking to the Democratic Party establishment. But I don't know.
I don't understand what that is as a strategy. It's like, it just seems to me like a description of the failure of the dirty break, not like an actual description of a strategy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like realpolitik in some ways, or like a kind of like, the crude materialism that, people use, right? Of like, this is the way things are. And so like, we have to kind of work within that framework to build our power. But there is no sort of alternative horizon, which is the big issue, and the thing that the Zoran administration may run into. The kind of like if your horizon is just kind of like a progressive, Bill de Blasio platform, how far will that get you in terms of really like organizing people? I mean, a challenge for us who, kind of orthodox Marxist people who love high politics is that, the quality of life message won, clearly it's a message that like resonates with people. And like, so maybe that will be enough, if he just passes these things, people will still support him. But, how does that actually, back to the comment that someone made earlier, like maybe the reforms will win and we will get the reforms, but like, where does that take us beyond that? It's hard to say, and it could take us some bad places, in the medium term.
DSA builds a hyper corrupt political machine in New York City, and it becomes like a Tammany Hall type situation where like, if you want to like get a parking meter fixed, you need to like pay off like some like corrupt like DSA guy. Like,
yeah, bro. I mean, that's like Isaac, our friend Isaac was joking about like, how he wants to read the like expose in 5 years of like all these DSA members kind of like, looking like, guilty or shameful, kind of like, these intra-party tensions, the corruption. It was all so beautiful when we started and what's happened. But
I know it's going to be epic if he actually wins the election, which I think might not happen. Like Sid was pretty confident that he'll win, but like I think we can't really be too sure about anything at this point. Like,
yeah,
like the Zionists and the billionaires and everyone are all going to unite behind this guy and do whatever they can to stop him. So we'll see what happens there. But if he does actually get in the office, like, it's going to be interesting to see, like, is DSA going to actually build like a political machine in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, there already is a political machine. It's just kind of small. The Socialists in Office Committee and the staff of the assembly members and senators, it exists. But like, I do think it's a totally different thing to like, be a party that's running
we're actually running the city. Yeah.
It takes a ton more people, like a ton more investment just of like people power.
They got to get like an epic Tammany Hall style building.
Bro, I would love that, man. As a city worker, politics aside, Zoran, if you're listening,
yeah,
give me a job.
We're all available for employment.
Yeah. I'll move to New York City if you give me a nice bureaucratic job.
Yeah, calling all Marxist Unity Group members. Come to New York City. This is democratic centralism. We need you here now. No, I'm just kidding. But it's exciting, man. I don't know. It's really exciting. I've definitely
exciting, but it's scary. Which is how it goes. That's how politics is.
Yeah, the stakes are higher. The stakes are higher now, good and bad.
Things can go very bad. It could be a total disaster for DSA. It could be the best or worst thing that happens for DSA. So either way, what happens, I think we just need to we need to intervene positively and try to push things in the best possible direction. And we need to but we need to be critical, obviously, as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, major props to Sid. I think like through his work on the campaign, his work within the chapter, I think he really is a model for like the kind of engagement that we would like, to see from folks on the left who are, critical of, SMC and kind of the, more reformist trends within DSA, but want to see it change. It does come from within. It comes from transforming our structures. It comes from raising political questions. And Sid's the best of the best. And to all the DSA members out there listening, vote for Sid on the NPC.
Yes, vote for Sid.
He's gonna keep doing it at a bigger stage.
So I think we're coming to a good kind of point to close off. What do you guys think?
Yeah. Is there anything else left? I don't know. I think we've tackled.
I think we've tackled most of the main issues. Everything that I want to talk about, at least.
Yeah, you'll have to have me and Sid back in November to talk more.
Definitely.
We'll have you on for the celebration cast.
I'm already celebrating, man.
We'll have to do it live in New York City. If that
would be fun. That would be fun. Let's do it.
One thing that I wanted to kind of end the cast on today was I guess there was at Glastonbury, they this has been all over social media, but that Irish rap group Kneecap was gonna perform, right? And the BBC was like doing the live stream or whatever, and I guess they didn't broadcast the Kneecap performance because they were obviously going to do like a bunch of anti-Israel stuff. But there's this other rapper, not Bob Dylan, but Bob Villain, spelled with a Vylan, who decided to basically, he was getting broadcast on the BBC, and he did a fucking epic anti-Israel chant that it's pretty fucking awesome. So I thought that would be a good way to end our Globalize the Intifada stream. So this may not be the energy that Zoran has in his campaign speeches, but we can help him. Death to the IDF! Death! That was fucking based. Sick. That goes hard. Death to the IDF. That's like the new Kill the Boar, man. Like we got our new Kill the Boar now. It's death to the IDF.
Hell yeah, for real, man. We're bringing that energy. Like the Zoran campaign's gonna do their thing, but like whether he's doing it or not, we're doing our fucking thing. Yeah. We're getting out there. We're putting our politics forward, as always.
Well, it's Glastonbury, not Glastonbury. So yes, I've been exposed as an American. Appreciation of British culture. But, anyway, comrades, I think that I'm gonna call it a day for today's stream. So yeah.
Sweet.
Death
Thanks,
to the
Donald.
IDF, everyone.
Yeah, death to the IDF, y'all. Take it easy.
Globalize the Intifada.
Fuck yeah.
How do you feel about this action today with all your things out in the street?
I hope that the communists blow you people up, man. You dig? That's where I am. Red China.